Good day, whatever time it is, wherever you're at, whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching it as a recording. Hello. Welcome to Right Hive Con 2023. My name is Tim Boffman. I will be the interviewer slash moderator, whatever you want to call it, for one of our guest honor interviews here with this year's event. And for this specific interview, I will be interviewing Adiba Jaigidar. So to give a little bit of a bio before we get into questions and whatnot, Adiba Jaigidar is the critically acclaimed and best-selling author of The Henna Wars, Honey and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating, A Million to One, and The Do's and Donuts of Love. A Bangladeshi Irish writer, she has an MA in Post-Colonial Studies from the University of Kent, England, and a BA in English and History from UCD, Ireland. All of her writing is aided by tea and a healthy dose of Janelle Monáe and Kaylee Kiyoko. When not writing, she is probably ranting about the ills of colonialism, playing video games, or expanding her ever overflowing lipstick collection. She can be found at adibajaigidar.com or at Adiba_J, easy for me to say, on Twitter, and Dibs_J on Instagram. Hello, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time people are watching this, to you, Adiba.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited.
Wonderful. So I'll get right into questions, and I will ask the token question to every author I feel like gets asked as their first question in every interview because I think it's a good place to start. What inspired you to start writing?
So I've always actually loved storytelling. So even before I could like pick up a pen or before I knew like the alphabet, I loved like telling stories. Like I would watch a movie or a TV show, and then I would make up stories in my head and I would like act them out with like my dolls or something or just by myself. So I think once I began to read and write, it just felt very natural to go from telling stories to myself in my head to actually writing them down. And because, I grew up in Bangladesh and then I moved to Ireland when I was 10, and both of these cultures are very like steeped in storytelling traditions. They really like love literature. And so I felt like I was always surrounded by stories. And my family definitely really, really encouraged like reading, telling stories, writing. My like parents would often buy me books when I was a child. My grandmother had like a little cupboard where she put like kept all my books even after I moved to Ireland.
Mhm.
So I think I always felt like I love telling stories and nobody kind of tried to put a stop to it. Nobody was like, maybe that's not the right path for you, which, I'm really grateful for.
Sure.
And then, coming to Ireland, I don't know if you've ever been here, but in Dublin, you should definitely visit because it
I
is a
want
great
to, yes.
city, Dublin. But in Dublin, there's like literature everywhere. There's like statues of like James Joyce, there's like bridges named after authors. So it's
Mhm.
kind of difficult to avoid the literature of the city. So I just feel like I was really lucky to kind of grow up in two cultures that really appreciated literature. And so it just felt very natural to me to start writing.
So with that, obviously, as you have said there, the Bangladeshi culture, the Irish culture, both very literature appreciative. Just to grossly oversimplify that very well flowered explanation you gave there. One of the things that, particularly in Irish culture, and I'm sure this is the case in Bangladeshi culture as well, but Irish is what uh, the culture's folktales I have a little bit more familiarity with is that it is a folktale heavy culture. Do you How do you think the various cultures that you grew up around and their stories, their folk tales, their love for authors influence the way that you write and the way you tell stories?
I think first of all, like just in terms of actually being able to see, authors from this culture is like a very big step.
Mhm.
especially being like a woman of color. I think a lot of the times, even like growing up, I would see like Irish authors, but obviously they wouldn't be people of color. They would be white people, and they wouldn't be like queer or Muslim. So I think one of the big obstacles that a lot of people like me face is just being able to think maybe I could be, on a bookshelf one day. Maybe my books could be in a bookshop. Um, and so I think it helped that I had a background of being Bangladeshi because while Bangladeshi literature isn't necessarily super popular in like, English language countries,
Sure.
and there's not a lot of Bangladeshi diaspora authors, I did, see Bangladeshi language authors, and I was like, wow, like Bangladeshi culture values literature so much. So why can't I bring that to like to the diaspora? And so I think like that was definitely really, really helpful. But I also think like in terms of folk tales, Bangladeshi culture is also like very heavy on folk tales. And I think when you have that culture of like folk tales, folk stories, you're hearing stories all the time. And so I think that's just really helpful as a storyteller, even if you're not necessarily like writing those folk tales or bringing them to your own literature.
Mhm.
It's just helpful to grow up always being surrounded by stories and with like an emphasis on literature, especially because I think in a lot of cultures, literature is so de-emphasized.
For
And
sure.
people are kind of like, oh, the arts, they're not that important. And I never necessarily felt like that. I felt like importance was always given to literature in like the places where I grew up.
That makes sense. One of the things that you brought up, and I know that you have talked about in other things that you have written or interviews, whatever it may be, is that your experience as a queer Muslim woman of color is uh, certainly not the norm in the literature world, particularly the traditionally published literature world. And there are various reasons for that, but it is a unique experience, as you've stated. How do you think that unique perspective, that unique experience that you have has really changed or influenced the way that you present your writing, not even necessarily as an author, but in just the way you craft your stories?
Um, I think there's difficulties associated with it when it comes to crafting, but also like obviously benefits as well. So in terms of difficulties, I think one of the things that's difficult when you're a marginalized author, you know, in terms of any marginalization, is that you feel like you don't have a blueprint for how to write your story. Because there might not be someone who's done it before.
Sure.
So you can't kind of come in and be like, oh, maybe this is how somebody else has written a Bangladeshi character. This is how somebody else has written like a queer Muslim character. So how can I kind of go off of that? You're almost kind of creating your own blueprint sometimes. So some challenges that I found was navigating how to balance kind of more critical thoughts about being queer and Muslim with more like celebratory thoughts about being queer and Muslim,
Mhm.
and kind of even thinking about how the story might be received. Because I didn't know if it would be received positively or negatively or somewhere in between. So I think those were difficult things to navigate as I was writing because I was thinking about all of those things. Um, but then in terms of like benefits, I think it's also kind of nice to not have a blueprint because you can kind of go in and you can do your own thing and you can like figure it out. There's like a little bit more of creativity there. And I think even in terms of not knowing what the reception is going to be like, I think, it worked out really well for me because I think the representation was very lacking. And now, it is better just in the few years since I've been published. But so many people were really, really eager to pick up my book and to support me because they felt like they had maybe never seen this before. And so I think it really helped kind of get the word of mouth out about my books, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, and in addition to like word of mouth is obviously invaluable to authors as a general thing. You were fortunate enough to have your debut novel, The Henna Wars, be an incredibly well-received book, to say the least. Time included it on their list of 100 best young adult books of all time. And there's other books on that list like Lord of the Flies, Catcher in the Rye. These, at least in American education, like these books that I remember growing up and having to read in middle school or high school, depending on the book, because my teachers told me to. Um, how how surreal is the feeling having your book placed on a list next to books that are, um, in many cases, considered to be classics within their genre?
Yeah, it was very, very surreal and definitely incredibly unexpected. And honestly, like the funny story of how I even found out about that list was that my friend sent me a link on WhatsApp, and she didn't, she didn't say, "Oh, your book is on this." She just sent me the link, and I
Uh-huh.
clicked on it, and I was like, "Oh, cool!" Like a list of the 100 best YA books of all time. And I was just like scrolling through it, like, yeah, yeah, sure. These books are good. And then I saw like the Hen Awards, and I was like, wait, like what's actually going on? So yeah, it was honestly, it was amazing. And I think for me, with my publishing story or my publishing journey, is that I published the Hen Awards with like a small press called Page Street, who are amazing, and who've done like an amazing job with the book. But obviously, I didn't have the big splashy six-figure book deal. I didn't
Sure.
have like a huge marketing and publicity budget. I had a small press who were very dedicated and, really trying to, push my book. But I kind of expected that it would kind of like it would find its readers, hopefully.
Sure.
It was also just at the height of the pandemic because my book came out in May 2020.
Mhm.
So I was like, sure, hopefully my books will find its readers. But I've done what I can, I've written the book, whatever. And then when it kind of took a life of its own, I was just really shocked because I think it's really like readers who did all of that. They kind of, picked it up, they loved it, they reviewed it, they shared it with people. And that's why it even ended up on the Times 100 list. I think it wouldn't have been possible without those like readers kind of championing it. So yeah, I was really shocked just because I felt like so many things were stacked against the book, but then it just kind of worked out. And I'm still kind of like sometimes I don't believe that I am on that Times 100 best list because it was just so unexpected.
Right. Did you for a moment think that your friend had made a very elaborate prank and photoshopped you in somehow?
I didn't, only because I know my friend is
Oh,
terrible with technology.
okay, fair. I like how that's the limiting factor to this being a prank. Um, what I'd like to know a little bit more about now. You have a book in your little background behind you, the Do's and Donuts of Love. Tell me a little bit about that book first off.
So, The Do's and Donuts of Love is basically the Great British Bake Off meets Sapphic Romance. It's about this Bangladeshi Irish girl called Shirin, and she has just broken up with her ex-girlfriend. And she has also just gotten into this baking competition, a reality TV show called the Junior Irish Baking Show. And once she gets there, she realizes that her ex-girlfriend is also a competitor, along with this new girl that she's kind of developing a crush on. So things kind of get a little bit messy. You know how reality TV shows go and how a little bit of a love triangle goes. So Shirin is trying to navigate her feelings while also trying to win this competition.
Okay, fair enough. So do you have baking, cooking experience like in a professional setting, or are you someone who just cooks on your own, or are you somebody who just, I thought that I would love to write about baking and I would burn my house down if I tried otherwise?
So I am not somebody with professional baking or cooking experience. I'm
Okay.
actually not like a great cook, but I am pretty good at baking.
Okay.
I don't do it super often, but I do have like my family love my chocolate cake that I make, and they love my lemon cookie. So there's like specific things that I'm really good at baking for some reason.
Okay.
So I enjoy baking. I don't do it that often, but I do enjoy it. And so, I was kind of like I thought it'd be really fun to just write a baking book, just because I love watching reality TV shows about like food and cooking and baking. They're always so intense and so fun. And so
Mhm.
that's really like where this book came from.
So, on the same topic, I recognize that this is not directly about your book, but as somebody who enjoys and consumes reality TV around cooking, baking, whatever terminology there. What are your thoughts on the just vibe differences between British cooking shows and American cooking shows? Because, like, in my experience, having watched both like British cooking shows, like Great British Bake Off and shows like that, they are competition inherently, but they are cordial, familial. Like there's kinship and bonds that develop between the contestants. And I realize that it's a longer run show than just like a one off, but it's reality. And then in the U.S., you have things like Cutthroat Kitchen, where Alton Brown, literally just sabotages you all day. Like thoughts on that difference in vibe?
Yeah, so I think it's really nice actually that there's such differences in vibes, because for me, I think that I can kind of fit what I want to watch into, which TV show I watch from which region.
Mhm.
Like even there's such a big difference between the Master Chefs, like MasterChef UK versus
Mhm.
MasterChef US, and then MasterChef Australia is like also like really, really different, which
Okay.
I think is really fun, because if you want to learn something about cooking, you would watch MasterChef Australia. If you want to
Mhm.
watch like a more low key show, you would watch MasterChef UK. If you want to watch something really intense, you would watch MasterChef US. So I love that, because personally I love it when reality TV shows are really cutthroat, when they're really intense, because
Sure.
I'm kind of here for the drama. I want people to sabotage each other. But
Sure.
then sometimes I don't want that. So then I would watch, the Great British Bake Off. So I think it's nice that we have the choice.
You kind of gave the three different faces of Master Chef there. Do you think that your main love triangle from the Do's and Donuts of Love, do you think all of them would be the best fit on a British style show like that, or do you think that maybe they would fit better under different realms of those cooking shows?
Yeah, I think they would probably fit under different realms. I think my main character, Shirin, she would probably fit best either into Australia or the UK,
Okay.
just because she really loves to bake. So I think she would love something like Australia, where she gets to like just talk about her baking. I think Neve and Chris would probably do better in the US, because they're kind of more here for the competition and for like the drive to win. So yeah, I think they have like different personalities for reality TV shows.
Fair enough. It's always interesting to think about how your characters would perform in a world that is outside of the pages you have written. So I was just curious on that. Um, with uh, with your books, obviously you've gotten four out there into the world at this stage. Um, I, Almost every writer I have ever encountered, I ask the question, what are you working on? And nearly everyone I've ever talked to, the answer is usually not, oh, I'm working on this project. It is, I have 43 things I am working on. I never sleep. Please leave me alone. What are your 43 things you are working on?
Yeah, I am also working on a lot of projects. You're
I
correct about
knew.
that. I'm currently working on, I guess, like the most like the project that's coming next for me
Okay.
is a book that I've co-written with my friend, Farida Abike Yamide. It's called Four Eids and a Funeral. And it's kind of like a Muslim rom-com. And it's just about these two like teenagers um, who kind of like they have like an like childhood best friends to enemies to friends to lovers kind of dynamic.
Okay.
And they're like in the small town, and they're kind of like forced to work together, and they're trying to figure that out. So we've had like a lot of fun working on that, and we're kind of like finishing up revisions on that.
Okay.
And alongside that, I'm also working on like my next solo romance book, which is I can't speak too much about it because it hasn't been announced, but
Sure.
it's kind of like academic rivals to lovers, sapphic romance. So I'm really excited about that one. I'm having a lot of fun working on it as well.
Okay. Um, so obviously a lot of your books, and not to oversimplify, but a lot of what you've described that you've written tends to fall broadly under romance, just for lack of a better overarching term. Um, if let's say something happened, you were banned from ever writing romance ever again, what genre would you want to write in?
Um, there's like a lot of genres that I would love to write in just because I actually like read very widely. So I actually I've written in some nonfiction anthologies, and I have a story coming up in a horror anthology that's going to be published in 2024. But, if I exclude all of that, I would really love to write a thriller. Um, because I like thrillers are kind of my comfort reads, which is a bit weird, I know, because it's all about murder, but
Sure.
um I love like the drama of it. I love, the page turner aspect. So yeah, I would just absolutely love to write a thriller.
Fair enough. I think that there's certainly a market for thrillers in general. It's very well read. I know that people who are into it, they get super into it. So um,
That would be me, very into it.
certainly not a bad thing. So with us being here at Right Hive Con, I want to ask a question more specific to Right Hive, and the tagline for the organization is "Writing the Future We Need." And that statement, if you were to take a moment to reflect on that statement, what does "Writing the Future We Need" mean to you?
I think, especially considering what is kind of happening in the world right now, in like the literary world with a lot of like book bans happening
Mhm,
globally. I know there's a lot of book bans in the US.
mhm,
There's been book bans in the UK, and it's also like starting now in Ireland, which actually like Ireland has a pretty recent history with like censorship. So it's kind of sad to
mhm.
see it. Um I think for me, writing the future we need kind of means kind of speaking back to these like book bans and, really prioritizing the literature that we need to be putting out there despite them, and kind of fighting back against all of this. Because I do think, it's kind of sad to see everything that is happening, especially at a time when we are seeing more. We're seeing more like marginalized authors writing. We're seeing more diverse stories. And I think the book bans are a result of that. And that's kind of why we need to fight back against them even more because,
Mhm.
the marginalized authors, we deserve to be telling these stories, and marginalized readers deserve to be seeing that representation and reading those stories.
Makes total sense. And yeah, it's I don't think, and my experience may be skewed as someone who didn't necessarily grow up as a heavy reader, admittedly. But one of the things that you threw out there is that there has been a growth, significantly so, of marginalized writers, of marginalized individuals that, whether they are writing true novels or short stories or whatever they are choosing to write in over recent years. And not to say that there weren't those folks writing before, but they're more visible than before. And that's certainly a positive. And I think it's interesting you bring that up as a corollary as to why a lot of bans are happening. While, I think, and this is probably a whole separate topic, but like, while I think that it's certainly possible that they um, could be coincidental in their occurrences, something tells me it's not. Just an educated guess, knowing how history works historically. Um, one thing I want to ask you, because you obviously do have, as we've discussed to this point, a unique background prior to writing, and really that has influenced your writing. But by the same token, writing is and being an author is a profession that has been around for centuries. What is something that about the experience of being an author that you'd wish you'd known before, be it publishing your first book, signing your first deal, whatever it may be?
Um, that's a difficult question. Um, I think, I guess I wish I had known a little bit more about, the being an author, being a profession, and, the book industry being a business. Because I think a lot of authors coming into it, before getting a book deal, or usually actually before, I think newer authors are very much caught up in the dream, usually until their first book is published or until they have a second book, which I think can be a little bit like detrimental sometimes.
Okay.
Um, I kind of I kind of wish I had known a little bit more of the business before I had gone into it, because I do think being an author can often be a lot about balancing like business and creativity. Um, and so I feel like after I published my first book, I was actually like in a very low place for a little while, just because I think like so much happens in terms of the business of publishing. You start seeing like your sales numbers and things like that, and it like a lot of things can kind of get you down at that point. And I think I for me, I wish that I had been a little bit more prepared going into it. And I kind of wish that like newer authors as well were a little bit more prepared, are a little bit more prepared going into it.
Makes sense. Yeah. So kind of a follow up on that. It's a little bit different topic, but same basic idea. So, um, I write as well. I'm on another panel for those watching. If you haven't seen some of the art panels, I'll be on another one, and you'll see my face again. Um, but I also tend to, in the stories I write, be the short stories or not, I tend to write heavily queer characters and whatnot. And I know that writing queer romance, sapphic romance, can present its own unique challenges. Now, I write in sci-fi rather than romance, but even so, there are blending of genres that happen. Like just because somebody is writing sci-fi doesn't mean there can't be romantic angles. Just because somebody's writing romance doesn't mean there can't be baking reality TV in it, as proven there. What do you think? Because I'm sure there are people here who they are attending this and they are somebody trying to find out answers to questions that they want to be a writer and they don't know. What do you think a good piece of advice would be for someone looking to write, and specifically to write queer sapphic stories, whatever it may be, um, that will help them best be able to succeed as a writer?
Um, I think in terms of writing, so just in general, the writing advice that I always give, because this is what I struggled with always, was to finish writing your books. Because I think this is like one of the most challenging things for a lot of newer writers, especially. They love, or we love, to chase new ideas. But that is so like detrimental, because if you don't finish writing your book, you can never like revise it, and then you can never send it to an agent or get it published, etc. So finish writing your book. That's my overall advice to all writers all the time. But in terms of writers who are specifically writing sapphic stories, queer stories, I think my big piece of advice is to persevere, because I think one of the most challenging parts of this industry can be getting rejected. And I think if you are, marginalized, and especially if you're writing, sapphic stories, because sad to say, I think that sapphic stories are like a little bit more marginalized than some other stories.
Sure.
So I think, yeah, like people think they have like a smaller audience. And, there's like a lot of discourse around, sapphic literature versus other queer literature as well, a lot of the times. Um, but regardless of that, I think like the most important thing is to persevere. This industry is tough. And I think that you can't be a person who takes rejections and doesn't like run with it, doesn't go to like, just doesn't take the next opportunity, because that is a very like easy way to kind of burn out of the industry.
Mhm.
You are going to face rejections. Like, I think that's just a part of this industry in general. But if you're writing, queer or sapphic stories, you're going to face more rejections, most likely. And you just kind of have to deal with that, unfortunately. And you have to keep writing, and you have to keep trying. which is, much easier said than done. I know
Sure.
that, but it is very, very important to kind of go into the industry with that mindset.
Okay. Um, so the last like big question I want to make sure that I get to here is, the books you have written. Obviously, you've had four different ones that are out so far, plus the stuff you're working on. But four out currently. Um, there's a quote by John Green, and I am going to butcher this, so apologies if John Green happens to jump into our con. Um, something to the effect of, when a book is put out into the world, it ceases to be a writer's story and becomes the reader's story, or something to that effect. Um, do you believe that's the case? And if so, why? And if not, like, what reasoning would you have as to why it isn't?
Yeah, I think I agree. Like, I think that once you've written your book, you can't, once you've written it, edited it, and put it out into the world,
Sure.
you can't take it back. You can't like start changing it. And so at that point, you kind of have to let it go because there's no point in you kind of holding on to it. Whereas I think at that point, like readers come into the book and they may interpret it differently than you intended. And as an author, you kind of have to just be okay with that because you've done your job and now now the readers are doing their thing. They're reading the books and they're taking what they want away from it, and you can't kind of be like, no, that's not what I meant. um because at the end of the day, like, the words are there and you've done the writing part.
So you brought up something interesting there I wanted to piggyback off of. Readers are going to take away whatever they take away. That's just kind of natural. And some of that could be lessons, some of that could be morals from the story. One of the things that I've seen gets taken away from a lot of media, books included, is people come away from books with their own ships of characters. Do your books have a shipping community around them?
um I I'm not sure because I think it's tough because obviously I write like romance books and this is my first like love triangle. And so with my other books, it's so squarely like these two characters are meant to be together. So I
Sure.
guess, people ship them together because in the book it's obvious that they should be together. Whereas I find the strongest shipping communities out there are when there's like an opposite ship to the main ship.
Okay.
um, so people like ship that opposite ship, or then they can ship the main ship against the opposite ship, if that makes sense.
It
So I
does.
think the strongest shipping communities is when there's multiple ships in a piece of media because there's kind of things to bounce off of. Whereas with my books currently, it's just like the one main ship. So I think whilst people ship them, it's not like a strong shipping community.
Do you think that's going to change with the do's and donuts of love, since it is a love triangle?
I'm not sure because it is a love triangle, but I kind of call it a love triangle, kind of. So it's like a little bit
Okay.
more complicated.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out.
Okay. Fair enough. So, last question before for those attending live, we'll have the live Q&A in the chat if people are asking questions. Last question for the recording, so to speak. Is there anything that you would like to share, be that plugging yourself, be that plugging your own work, or just any additional commentary you have before we conclude?
Um, I don't think so. I like, I guess, I just want to say that I'm really excited to be here and to be speaking to you, speaking to everybody who is attending. And I'm really excited to have just published The Do's and Donuts of Love. Super excited to be sharing it with everyone. It's kind of my first time writing like a thought character, writing a character with anxiety, which was, really important for me because those marginalizations are also something that I have. And so, I hope that I hope that everybody kind of enjoys it. I hope that you can relate to Sharon, who is the main character. And yeah, just thank you.
Well, for those who are attending live, as mentioned, there'll be uh, ability to do questions and answers in Discord for those watching as a recording. And for anyone watching in general, thank you so much for attending. Adiba, I greatly appreciate you taking time to chat with me today as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really great speaking to you.
All right. For those watching the recording, have a good day. The rest of you, we'll see you in the chat.